What if the story of creation isn't a beginning, but a restoration? We are taught that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. But what if those famous words describe not a new creation, but the aftermath of a catastrophic war? A war that took place not in some distant spiritual realm, but right here, on a forgotten, pre-Adamic earth that was once the original throne of God. You have read Genesis your entire life, but have you ever felt a deep, unspoken question lingering in the darkness between verse 1 and verse 2? Theologians have debated it for centuries, but the truth has been carefully guarded, deemed too profound for the masses. Hidden within the prophecies of Ezekiel and the laments of Isaiah are clues to a world that was erased. A world of light, ruled by the anointed cherub Lucifer, before his rebellion plunged creation into chaos and watery darkness. This is not a fanciful tale. This is a doctrine pieced together from ancient rabbinic traditions and scriptures that point to one staggering conclusion. The Garden of Eden was not the start of a new world, but a holy sanctuary planted on recovered ground. And Adam was not the first being to walk this planet, but the first man tasked with reclaiming a fallen kingdom. Why was this truth hidden? What does it reveal about God's ultimate plan for humanity? If you seek a deeper understanding of the Scriptures, one that connects the dots that have been scattered for millennia, then join us on this journey. What you are about to learn will not shake your faith, but fortify it with a truth that is as ancient as time itself. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell, because the secrets of the first earth are about to be revealed. Let us turn to the very first page of Scripture. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. A perfect, complete statement. But the very next verse presents a profound contradiction. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. How could a perfect creation from a perfect God immediately become a dark, chaotic wasteland? Theologians have called this the Great Gap, an ocean of untold time between two verses. The Bible itself gives us a clue, hidden away in the book of Job. When God confronts Job, he asks a question that shatters our timeline of creation. In chapter 38, God asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Stop and consider this. If Adam had not yet been created, who were these sons of God rejoicing over the earth's foundation? This single verse proves that a host of celestial beings existed and witnessed the birth of our world, long before the first man. The secret is buried in the original Hebrew language. The phrase translated as "without form and void" is tohu wabohu. These words are not used to describe a new, unfinished creation. In every other place they appear in Scripture, like in Jeremiah chapter 4 verse 23, they describe the aftermath of a terrible divine judgment. A world brought to ruin. This was not a world waiting to be made, it was a world that had been unmade. This leads to a staggering yet scripturally sound conclusion. The darkness and watery chaos of Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 are not the beginning of the story. They are the ruins of a forgotten first chapter. The 6 days of creation were not a creation out of nothing, but a restoration of a planet that had already known life, light, and a catastrophic war that plunged it into darkness. A war that was deliberately erased from the simple telling of our origins. But the clues are not confined to the canonical Bible alone. For centuries, ancient Jewish sages and keepers of the oral law have whispered of this forgotten time. In texts that predate many of the New Testament books, these scholars debated the very chaos described in Genesis. They knew, through traditions passed down from the patriarchs, that the story of creation as we read it was not the absolute beginning. They spoke of worlds that came before. The Midrash, a collection of ancient rabbinic commentaries on the Hebrew Scriptures, poses a startling question. It speaks of God creating and destroying worlds before He created ours. Why? Because these previous creations had failed. This ancient tradition directly supports the idea that the earth described as a watery, dark wasteland was not an empty slate. It was a ruin. The chaos of Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 was the direct result of a prior judgment, the remnants of a world that had known light and life, and then rebellion. So why is this profound truth not taught in our churches? Why was it set aside? The answer lies in the turbulent history of the early church. As leaders worked to establish a unified doctrine and defend the faith from heresies, certain complex truths were deemed too dangerous for the common believer. The story of a pre-Adamic world, a war on earth before mankind, and a planet in need of restoration was complicated. It was simpler and safer to present a clean beginning. A story that starts with Adam. Thus, the full account was veiled, deliberately simplified to protect a young and growing faith. The truth was not erased, but hidden in plain sight, preserved for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. The story you were taught is not a lie, but it is incomplete. It is a story that begins on chapter 2, leaving the catastrophic first chapter buried in the dark waters of Genesis. And understanding this lost beginning is the key to unlocking the true purpose of Eden. So what was this world that came before Adam? Imagine, if you will, an earth that was not yet called earth. It was the original throne of God, a physical kingdom of light and splendor. The prophet Ezekiel gives us a chilling glimpse of its ruler in chapter 28, describing the king of Tyre, but speaking of a far older being. He calls him the anointed cherub who covers, perfect in beauty, adorned with every precious stone. This was Lucifer, the light-bearer, who walked in the midst of the stones of fire on the holy mountain of God. This mountain was not in some distant heaven. It was the primordial earth, the seat of cosmic authority. But pride was found in him. The rebellion we often imagine in a far-off spiritual realm was a terrestrial event, a cosmic treason that unfolded on this planet. Isaiah chapter 14 tells us of his ambition. I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. This was a declaration of war against the Creator for dominion over the physical creation. He was not alone. A third of the angelic hosts, those primordial sons of God, who shouted for joy at creation, chose to follow him. The resulting conflict was not one of swords and shields, but a cataclysm of divine judgment that shattered the very fabric of the first creation. The judgment was absolute. God cast Lucifer down, and the world he corrupted was plunged into ruin. This is the very scene Jeremiah witnesses in a vision in chapter 4, verse 23. I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. He uses the exact Hebrew words, do tohu wabohu. This was not a description of an unfinished world. It was the description of a world that had been judged and broken. The watery darkness of Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 is the battlefield after the war, a planet flooded and shrouded in darkness, awaiting a new command from its rightful king. Understanding this hidden history changes everything. It means the 6 days of creation were not a beginning but a restoration of a fallen kingdom. The creation of Adam was not merely to tend a garden, it was to establish a new line of kingship on contested ground. The serpent that appears in Eden was not a random intruder. He was the deposed prince of the former world, returning to his old dominion to usurp God's new heir. This is the forgotten context, the omitted first chapter that reveals the true stakes of the spiritual war we are all a part of. This raises a critical question. If this truth is so foundational, why is it not the cornerstone of our faith? Why have generations been taught a simpler story? The version you learned in Sunday school is one of beautiful simplicity. In 6 days, God created a perfect world from nothing. It is a powerful and true narrative. But it is not the complete narrative. This simplicity was a deliberate choice made by early church leaders for reasons we must understand. Imagine the early church, a fledgling faith battling heresies and persecution from every side. Their primary mission was to establish the core tenets of the faith, the divinity of Christ, His resurrection, and the path to salvation. In this fragile environment, complex doctrines like a pre-Adamic world, a terrestrial angelic war, and a restored earth were seen as a spiritual liability. They feared such profound truths could create confusion, invite doubt, and distract from the central message of the gospel. It was a truth deemed too heavy for a young faith to carry. In the great councils where the canon of Scripture was debated and doctrines were solidified, decisions were made that shaped the future of Christian thought. Certain texts were deemed apocryphal, and specific interpretations were discouraged, not because they were false, but because they were considered strong meat for a church that was still feeding on milk. The leaders, and what they believed was pastoral wisdom, chose to shield the flock. They presented a streamlined history of creation that was clear, defensible, and focused solely on God's relationship with humanity through Adam. Thus, the story of the first earth was not maliciously erased, but intentionally veiled. It was set aside, preserved only in the prophetic writings and the deep traditions of the Hebrew sages, waiting for a time when believers were ready to look beyond the veil. The truth was sacrificed for the sake of clarity. But now, for those who seek to understand the full counsel of God, the veil is being lifted. We are beginning to see that the war for creation did not start in the Garden of Eden. It started long before. This is not just ancient history. This is the missing key to understanding your own life, your own struggles, and God's ultimate plan for redemption. When you grasp that the earth is contested territory, a kingdom being reclaimed, your entire perspective on spiritual warfare changes. It is no longer a vague, abstract battle. It is a fight for dominion, and you are on the front lines of God's restoration project. Perhaps you are hearing this now because you were meant to. This is not a truth for the spiritually immature or for those content with a surface-level faith. It is for the watchmen, the seekers, the believers, who have always felt there was something more to the story. You have read the Bible and sensed the gaps, the echoes of a forgotten conflict. This knowledge is not meant to shake your faith, but to confirm what your spirit has long suspected. The story is far grander, and your role in it far more significant than you were ever told. In an age where faith can often feel a mile wide and an inch deep, this hidden truth provides the bedrock we have been searching for. It explains the intense and ancient animosity the enemy has for humanity and for this planet. We are not just a random creation. We are the heirs to a throne he lost. This is why the world is filled with chaos. It is the lingering shadow of a war that began before time as we know it. And it is the reason your faith is not just a comfort, but a weapon. Understanding this lost beginning is the first step to truly comprehending the end. It reframes the purpose of the cross, the mission of the church, and the promise of Christ's return. He is not just coming back to save souls. He is coming back to reclaim his throne on the very ground where the rebellion began. The Garden of Eden was the first beachhead in this reclamation, and we are the descendants of its first king. And the final chapter of this cosmic war is still being written. But now we must go deeper. The restoration of the earth and the planting of a garden is a story we know well. But what if the Garden of Eden itself was not a new concept? The prophet Ezekiel, when speaking of Lucifer before his fall, declares something that should stop every Bible student in their tracks. He says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God." This was spoken of the cherub before Adam was ever formed from the dust. How is this possible? The only logical conclusion is one that has been hidden from the masses. There were two Edens. The first was a celestial garden of cosmic scale, a place of unimaginable light and splendor on the original earth, the domain ruled by Lucifer. The second Eden, the one of Adam, was a new and holy sanctuary planted upon the restored soil of that fallen, ancient world. A smaller, guarded beginning on the very ground where the first rebellion took place. This revelation forces us to ask a question that changes our entire understanding of the fall of man. If the first Eden was perfect, what went wrong? And what secrets from that original, fallen garden were brought into the new one? Consider the two trees in Adam's garden. Were they present in the primordial Eden? Or was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil placed in the second garden for a new reason, a test for a new kind of creation destined to reclaim what was lost? The story you thought you knew has a hidden prequel. The Garden of Eden is not just a beginning, it is a clue that points back to a forgotten glory and a far older tragedy. Understanding the secrets of the first Eden is the key to understanding the true purpose of the second. And it reveals why the serpent was already there, waiting, for he was not an intruder in a new land, but the deposed king returning to his old ruined kingdom. This profound truth reframes our entire understanding of God. He is not merely a creator who works from a blank slate. He is, first and foremost, restorer. The 6 days of Genesis are not a story of initial creation out of nothing, but a story of reclamation out of chaos. It reveals a God who refuses to abandon his handiwork, who looks upon a ruined, judged creation and chooses not to discard it, but to redeem it. Every act, from separating the light from the darkness to forming man from the dust, is an act of divine restoration, a testament to his unwavering commitment to his kingdom. And this is where humanity's true purpose is revealed. Adam was not created in a vacuum. He was God's answer to a cosmic rebellion. When God commanded him to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, this was not a simple blessing. It was a royal commission, a strategic mandate to retake a fallen dominion from its usurper. We were created to be the agents of God's restoration on a planet that was and still is contested territory. Our very existence is an act of war against the forces that sought to claim this world for their own. Does this knowledge threaten the foundations of our faith? Absolutely not. It solidifies them. This hidden history does not contradict Scripture, it illuminates it. It provides the missing context that explains the immediate presence of the serpent in the garden, the intensity of the spiritual warfare described throughout the Bible, and God's ultimate plan for a new heaven and a new earth. It is the key that unlocks the deeper narrative, connecting Genesis to Revelation in a way that a simple creation story never could. This is the strong meat the Apostle Paul spoke of, a truth reserved for those who are no longer children in their faith, but are ready to understand the full counsel of God. What you have learned today is not meant to create doubt, but to forge an unshakable conviction. It is a call to see your role in God's story, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in the greatest restoration project in history. The war for creation did not end with Lucifer's fall, and the story is far from over. This brings us to the final, most profound revelation. A truth so immense it reframes all of history, both seen and unseen. If God knew of the first rebellion before it happened, then his plan of redemption did not begin in the Garden of Eden with Adam's fall. It began before the foundation of the restored world. The Apostle John in the book of Revelation was shown a glimpse of this eternal reality. He speaks of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Think on that. The sacrifice of Christ was not a backup plan. It was not a reaction to sin. It was the very cornerstone of the new creation. With this key, we can now read Genesis as it was always meant to be read. It is not merely an account of creation, but the first chapter of redemption. When God says, "Let there be light," he is not just commanding the sun to shine, he is declaring the coming of the light of the world into the darkness left by rebellion. The creation of man in his own image was the strategic placement of a vessel through which the Redeemer could one day enter his own creation. The entire restoration of the earth was a prophecy, a physical blueprint for the spiritual restoration Christ would accomplish on the cross. This is the ultimate secret, hidden in the gap between the verses. The entire Bible, from the watery chaos of Genesis to the New Jerusalem of Revelation, is a single, unbroken story about one person, Jesus Christ. He is the reason the ruined earth was not abandoned. He is the purpose for which Adam was formed. The Old Testament is the story of the preparation for the second Adam, the one who would finally succeed where the first cherub and the first man had failed. He is the true king, coming to reclaim his rightful dominion. Therefore, the story you were told is not false, but it is a shadow of a far greater truth. The Bible is not just a history of humanity. It is the chronicle of a cosmic war, a divine reclamation project that began in eternity past. Your faith is not a late addition to the story. It is your enlistment in this ancient conflict, your acceptance of a role in God's eternal plan. The war for creation is real. The stakes are an entire kingdom, and the victory was secured before the first day of restoration ever dawned. Take a moment and let this settle in your spirit. The story of creation is not just a story of a beginning, but of a restoration. The Bible you hold in your hands is the chronicle of a reclamation, a war for a kingdom that began before Adam ever took his first breath. This is not a truth that diminishes God, but one that reveals the true depth of His wisdom, His power, and His unwavering commitment to redemption. This is the story that has been waiting in the shadows of Scripture for a generation, with the courage to look deeper. For centuries, these profound truths were veiled, considered too complex or too dangerous for the masses. They were preserved for the watchmen on the wall, for the seekers who would not be satisfied with simple answers. Now, in these last days, the veil is being lifted. What was whispered in secret is now being proclaimed from the housetops, and you are hearing it because you were meant to. You are part of a generation being called to understand the full scope of God's eternal plan. If this truth has ignited a fire in your spirit, then show your support so we can continue to uncover what has been hidden. Please take a moment to leave a like on this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss a revelation. And now, we have a special members area. By becoming a member, you directly bless this work and help us continue producing edifying and revealing content just like this. We are a community of believers from all around the world, united in our search for the deep things of God. Let us know where you are watching from by leaving the name of your city in the comments below. It is a blessing to see how far these truths are traveling. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the mystery.